Several high-profile politicians are accused of sexual misconduct in what some are calling Taiwan's Me Too movement. A Chinese and American warship almost collide in the Taiwan Strait as top defense officials meet in Singapore. Hundreds gather in Taipei to remember protesters killed around Tiananmen Square in 1989. Plus, Thailand's capital celebrates Pride as hopes run high for same-sex marriage to be legalized. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Leslie Liao. Several politicians have come under fire for alleged sexual misconduct in what some are calling Taiwan's Me Too movement. This includes accusations against high-profile legislators from both major political parties. Joyce Tseng has more.
Another accuser comes forward. This is Mr. Lee. He's a former political worker who used to work with pro-democracy activist Wang Dan. He says Wang, who is one of the most famous student leaders during the 1989 Tiananmen Square protests, sexually assaulted him in a New York hotel room.
我跟他说我很害怕，他的回应只有跟我说老师是在开玩笑，不要当真，他只是玩。
This is just one in a recent flood of high-profile sexual misconduct allegations against political figures in Taiwan. This includes accusations against lawmakers from both the ruling DPP and opposition KMT parties, as well as workers associated with the parties. Last week, the DPP's presidential candidate, Lai Ching-te, publicly apologized for the party's mishandling of the sexual harassment case against a contract worker, which saw one official resign. Some are calling this Taiwan's Me Too moment, referring to the survivor-led movement against sexual violence that gained worldwide traction in 2017. According to the Secretary General of women's advocacy group Awakening Foundation, these revelations are a long time coming.
一点都不惊讶，其实让我比较惊讶的是，很多人愿意说出来这件事情，但实际上有这些事情是，并不是令人很惊讶的。
Workplace sexual harassment in general in Taiwan is quite common. A 2022 survey by the Labor Ministry found 140,000 women and 60,000 men experienced sexual harassment at work, but only 30,000 women and 9,500 men reported the incidents. As to why relatively few people spoke up, the survey showed most people feared not being taken seriously and potentially becoming a target of gossip, among other concerns. Chin says this is very much the case for those working in politics.
所以大家都会觉得说，政治工作领域，我们都以大局为重，所以我们都不要讲出来。那因为我们过去的职场文化会觉得说，好像在职场上遇到性骚扰，好像你本来就应该要忍受。
In a society where support for victims is still lacking, the latest accusations against some of the country's most visible public figures are especially notable. Both the DPP and KMT have said they do not tolerate sexual violence. Party leaders have pledged to act swiftly to investigate and remove perpetrators. But given the pervasiveness of sexual harassment in Taiwan's workplaces, more cases could still come to light. Howard Zhang and Joyce Zhen for TaiwanPlus.
Asia's premier security summit, the Shangri-La Dialogue, has come to an end. This year, the lack of communication between the U.S. and China was a top concern among attendees. Many countries in Asia now worry about the region's security situation. Jaime Okan reports.
For 20 years, militaries from around the world have gathered in Singapore for the annual Shangri-La Dialogue. Government officials, analysts, and foreign press all come together to exchange ideas on security and defense. But with this year's event concluded, a growing gap in communication between the U.S. and China has been the main topic of discussion. In one of the first speeches at the summit, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was quick to denounce an incident involving a Chinese fighter jet flying dangerously close to a U.S. military plane.
We've all just seen another troubling case of aggressive and unprofessional flying by the PRC. So, we will support our allies and partners as they defend themselves against coercion and bullying.
But this kind of activity isn't just taking place in the skies over the South China Sea. Once the summit was underway, Taiwan's military spotted a U.S.-guided missile destroyer and a Canadian warship transiting through the Taiwan Strait. Footage later released by Canadian media showed a Chinese warship coming within 140 meters of the destroyer and nearly causing a collision. Even though the transit took place in international waters, China is pointing blame at the U.S.
要真正的要避免这些，除了我们制定这样的规则，这些规则都是不得已而为之。我们要制定这样的规则，最好的办法就是我们各国，特别是各国的军机和军舰，都不要到别的国家领海和领空附近去转悠。
The comments come as China continues to operate fighter jets and warships around Taiwan, which it claims as part of its territory and has vowed to take by force if necessary. So far in 2023, close to 2,000 Chinese military aircraft have been spotted around Taiwan. Roughly 750 of those have breached Taiwan's Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ. This space isn't Taiwan's territory, but it's used for defensive purposes. Tensions in the Taiwan Strait are high, and in light of China's aggression, Taiwan has been boosting its combat readiness. The country has increased weapons purchases from the U.S. and has deepened bilateral security cooperation in an effort to harden its defenses. But the U.S. says it still sees communication with China as key to maintaining peace in Asia.
At the end of the day, communication is important in the sense that you get a better idea of what your opponent is thinking and possibly planning.
Despite China's rejection of a meeting with the U.S., officials from both sides shook hands at the opening ceremony. But Washington is still urging Beijing to reopen lines of communication.
And a cordial handshake over dinner is no substitute for a substantive engagement. And the more that we talk, the more we can avoid the misunderstandings and miscalculations that could lead to crisis or conflict.
With the Shangri-La Dialogue officially over, countries in Asia are now increasingly cautious. The concern now is what might happen if the current lack of official dialogue between the world's two largest superpowers goes on, and if tensions continue to escalate. Ethan Chen and Jaime Okan for TaiwanPlus.
South Korea and Japan are setting aside a military dispute from 2018 to further develop security ties.
예, 그 문제는 재발 방지 대책을 마련하는 데 중점을 두고 실무 협의부터 시작해서 해결해 나가기로 했습니다.
The two countries reached the agreement on the sidelines of the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. The dispute is over a 2018 incident where a South Korean warship allegedly locked its targeting radar on a Japanese aircraft. The two sides say greater security cooperation is needed going forward. Hundreds gathered in Taiwan's capital of Taipei to commemorate the deaths of people killed in the crackdown on protesters at Tiananmen Square in 1989. Bing Wong was there.
Gathering in Taipei's Freedom Square to mark 34 years since a bloody crackdown on protesters in Beijing. Hundreds came from all over Taiwan to remember those killed in what's become known as the Tiananmen Square massacre. Also here, pro-democracy activists recently migrated from Hong Kong.
We Hong Kongers have been commemorating the June 4th Tiananmen massacre ever since 1989. So it's all ingrained in our subconscious that we should care and practice our sympathy towards other people's yearning for democracy and freedom.
On June 4, 1989, tanks and troops were used in Beijing to quash peaceful pro-democracy demonstrations led by students. It's estimated that thousands were killed. The ruling Communist Party said it was acting to prevent chaos and maintain stability. Until 2019, Hong Kong was the only Chinese city that marked the anniversary, with more than 200,000 people at its last vigil. But with the imposition of a national security law, China's central government now explicitly forbids any public activities around what it calls the June 4th incident, seeing it as an act of dissent, which for many here in Taiwan makes the task of remembering the atrocity even more important. Since China's crackdown on Hong Kong in 2020, Taiwan has become the only place in the Chinese-speaking world where the Tiananmen massacre can be remembered. Hundreds have gathered here to take advantage of that freedom to commemorate those that lost their lives in Beijing in 1989. Activists here also erected this replica of the Pillar of Shame, a Hong Kong monument to the massacre that was torn down in 2021.
那也希望在这个地方可以声援，在对岸，然后在各地被威权压迫的人民，然后去表达我们想要自由、想要人权的诉求。
那我觉得自由是争取而来的，而不是现在可以这样讲话，就是有钱人这样争取。那我们要记住这个历史。 就是也要警惕，就是不要让这个民主自由就这样又被侵害了这样。
A moment of silence for those who died fighting for the freedom of speech, an act of remembrance in a place that upholds the values of democracy and human rights, and a promise to keep the flame alive for where it's dimmed. Patrick Chen and Bing Wong for TaiwanPlus.
Sunday marked the 34th anniversary of the Chinese government's crackdown on pro-democracy protesters in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. While China has moved to suppress any public discussion of the event, survivors continue working to keep the memory of it alive. TaiwanPlus spoke with two of those witnesses who shared their perspectives on the crackdown's legacy.
Hope turned to despair. The 1989 pro-democracy protests in China marked a turning point in world history. Threatened by the scale of the movement and the passion of its participants, the ruling Communist Party ruthlessly cracked down on protesters around the country, most famously in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. It's been 34 years, and in many ways today's China is unrecognizable from the country it was then. But for those that were there, the memories remain as vivid as ever. Zhou Fengsuo is one of the most well-known participants in the demonstrations. He now lives in New York, but in 1989 he was a student at Beijing's Tsinghua University.
所以我是第一个去天安门广场悼念，后来就有很多人在天安门广场聚集，然后慢慢的发展成一个全民运动，就不光是北京啊，中国当时有400多个城市参加。
Tiananmen today is remembered as a call for democracy by students in Beijing, but it all began with the death of a top Communist Party official. Hu Yaobang once held the party's highest office, but his liberal views on economic reform led to his removal. When he died a couple of years later, protesters took to the streets to show their support for Hu's ideas. From there, more and more people around the country began protesting, until the Communist Party, led by Deng Xiaoping, decided to put an end to the growing calls for democracy. Troops were sent to clear the demonstrators from Tiananmen Square on June 4th. The violent confrontation that followed was captured by much of the world's media. How many people were killed that day remains unknown. The number varies from hundreds to several thousands. Zhou says he saw dozens of bodies in a local hospital.
不惜一切代价要在这个指定时间去清场，所以就是说进入清场这个过程是非常血腥的，死了非常多的人，各个方面的，我们最后也是被坦克驱赶出来的。
Ordering the country's People's Liberation Army to fight its own citizens marked a turning point in Chinese history. Forced to choose between party and people, the PLA chose the party. It was a decision that not all within the military were willing to accept. Yao Cheng is a retired PLA Navy commander now living in Los Angeles. He says that Li Yaowan, then the political commissar of the PLA Navy, was sympathetic to the students. But his boss, Commander Liu Huaqing, was a staunch supporter of Deng Xiaoping. A purge was launched in the Navy right after the crackdown. Young officers considered loyal to Li were removed. Yao Cheng was transferred from his post in Hainan to the Navy headquarters in Beijing, where he replaced others who were purged.
同情学生的人就清除了大量的人，但是人清除以后，他需要什么？他需要人干活啊。他机关的这个军官，他就缺了。在这种情况下，把我调到北京。我是89年的年底调到北京去的。
Recalling his time with the Navy, Yao says that most young officers thought the students were fighting for a good cause, but they did not speak out because they knew they'd be punished for choosing a side. He says for them, the decision to stay quiet was a matter of life or death. It's a powerful reminder of the scars the event has left behind on those who witnessed it, even for the ones ordered to carry out the bloody crackdown. And until the Chinese people can speak without fear about what happened, those wounds are sure to remain open. Rick E., Sam Hui, and Jeremy Olivier for TaiwanPlus.
Students from National Taiwan University held a protest Sunday against the arrest of one of their schoolmates in Hong Kong who was released on bail on Monday. Lau Ka-yi was arrested on Saturday near the city's Victoria Park at an annual vigil marking the anniversary of the violent Tiananmen Square crackdown. Lau is a Hong Kong citizen and was arrested on suspicion of sedition and disorderly conduct. She was among almost 24 people taken away by Hong Kong police. The NTU Graduate Student Association says Lau's arrest was arbitrary and that she had only been peacefully expressing her opinions. Taiwan's China office has called on Hong Kong to respect freedom of speech. A Taiwan presidential hopeful is on a trip to Japan because he says he needs to better understand the country. Ko Wen-je says he's there to listen because Japan is Taiwan's most important partner in Asia. The former Taipei mayor is representing the Taiwan People's Party in the elections in early 2024. His 5-day trip to Japan includes visits to the country's parliament and think tanks. His first stop in Japan was visiting a temple along with his wife. On Monday, he met with a former Japanese Prime Minister, Noda Yoshihiko, and members of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party. Ko says the trip will be similar to the one he made to the United States in April.
听比说重要了，因为我要知道说他们在想什么。像去美国，大部分的时间是很认真在听他们的看话。
There are 7 months to go until Taiwan's presidential elections, and the main candidates are setting out their positions on China. Taiwan-China relations have worsened under current President Tsai Ing-wen of the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP. She's already served the maximum 2 terms and can't run again. The DPP's candidate is current Vice President and Party Chair Lai Ching-te. Over the weekend, he accused Beijing of trying to whip up fears of war so Taiwanese will vote for a more China-friendly candidate. But the opposition Kuomintang's nominee Ho You-yi says it's Lai's party that's brought Taiwan closer to war. Ho says his aim is to pursue peace. Coming up, ever wonder how to put on the perfect smile? Stay tuned to learn how.
For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please make sure to visit us at TaiwanPlus.com.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Officials in India say a signal fault is to blame for a deadly train crash last Friday in the eastern part of the country. They have also revised the death toll downwards, saying some bodies had been counted twice. John Van Trieste has the latest developments.
India's railway minister inspects the site of the country's deadliest accident in years. Just what happened Friday night when 3 trains collided is unclear, but officials say a fault with the electronic track management system was involved.
इस विषय में पॉइंट मशीन की बात है, इलेक्ट्रॉनिक इंटरलॉकिंग की बात है, इलेक्ट्रॉनिक इंटरलॉकिंग में जो चेंज किया जिसके कारण ये दुर्घटना हुई, जिसने भी किया, जिसने भी जो भी इसके कारण है, वो इन्वेस्टिगेशन से निकलेगा.
For now, work is focused on repairing damaged tracks and identifying the dead.
पूरी की पूरी कोशिश रहेगी कि वेडनेसडे मॉर्निंग का जो टारगेट है, वेडनेसडे मॉर्निंग तक कंप्लीट रेस्टोरेशन होके गाड़ियां नॉर्मल तरीके से चलने लगे.
Officials now say the death toll isn't as high as originally reported. The final figure is 275, revised down from over 300.
So finally they found that few dead bodies have been reported twice, double count.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has promised to punish anyone found responsible. With rescue work done, it's now up to investigators to determine what went so wrong. John Su and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Russia's Navy is conducting exercises in the Sea of Japan that will last for roughly 2 weeks. The country's defense ministry released footage of its warships leaving for the exercise on Monday. More than 60 warships will take part in the drills, which are focused on joint operations. 35 aircraft and more than 11,000 troops will also take part in live firing exercises. Russia claims it has repelled a major Ukrainian counteroffensive. The Russian Defense Ministry says it fought off a large-scale attack in 5 sectors along the front of the southern Donetsk region on Sunday. It claims to have killed 250 Ukrainian soldiers and destroyed 16 tanks, though this has not been fully verified. And staying with Russia, hundreds of supporters of Alexei Navalny, a well-known Kremlin critic, have been arrested across Russia for protesting on Navalny's 47th birthday. Navalny is Russia's most prominent opposition leader. He's currently serving 11.5 years in prison for fraud and contempt of court. Navalny says these are trumped-up charges that are being used to silence him. Thousands of revelers gathered in Thailand's capital, Bangkok, for Pride on Sunday. It comes as the man poised to be the country's next prime minister says he will push through the legalization of same-sex marriage. James Chater has more.
On the streets of Thailand's capital, Bangkok, a sea of colour at the city's LGBTQ Pride Parade. More than 50,000 people were in attendance. Many were calling for the legalization of same-sex marriage.
แต่วันนี้ค่ะเรามาแสดงให้เห็นว่าพวกเราชาว LGBT หรือว่าทุกเพศทุกวัยนะคะเราต้องการความหลากหลายและความเท่าเทียมและความเสมอภาคทางด้านกฎหมายนั่นเองค่ะคุณพี่ขาจริงๆผมหวังว่างานนี้มันน่าจะเป็นเหมือนเป็นหยดน้ำหยดนึงที่หยดลงไปแล้วมีคลื่นกระเพื่อมออกมาครับก็กะว่าหวังว่ามันจะรุนแรงขึ้นเรื่อยๆจนคนมองว่าโอเค LGBT เนี่ยเป็นเรื่องที่ปกติแล้วก็การแต่งงานการสมรสเท่าเทียมของเพศเดียวกันเนี่ยเป็นเรื่องที่ปกติเช่นกันครับผม
Thailand is a welcoming place for LGBTQ people, but conservative institutions have slowed efforts to pass same-sex marriage legislation. Taiwan remains the only country in Asia to have done so. But in Thailand, that ambition may be coming closer to reality. Attending this year's event was Peter Limjaroenrat, poised to become the country's youngest prime minister in 78 years. In last month's elections, his reformist Move Forward party won the popular vote on a progressive platform, which included moving ahead with same-sex marriage and gender recognition bills.
Diversity here is not a weakness, but diversity here is strength, and as you can see over here.
Events around LGBTQ Pride Month are a reminder of the ongoing fight for equality. But at this year's parade in Bangkok, there was much optimism that landmark changes may be on the horizon in Thailand. James Lin and James Chater for TaiwanPlus.
Smiling classes have opened in Japan for people who say that wearing a face mask during the pandemic affected their facial muscles. Eric Tsai takes a look.
There are 3 things a person needs to focus on to arrive at the perfect smile. That's according to smile coach Kawano Keiko.
口、頬、目、この順番、意識する順番も大事です。これが完璧な笑顔です。
Kawano, a former trainer in business etiquette, has been holding smiling classes since 2017. She's recently seen a surge in students after Japan relaxed face mask guidelines in March. With many smiles hidden behind masks during the pandemic, those in the class felt a bit of a sting in some of the muscles they haven't used often for some time.
コロナであんまり顔をしばらく動かしてなかったのでちょっと顔のいい運動になりました。
Apart from a good workout, Kawano believes a brighter smile leads to a happier life.
やっぱり人との出会いが増える。でチャンスが増える。そうすると人生が豊かになる。なのでハッピーになれる。笑顔イコールハッピーっていうのがそこがテーマですね。
However, experts who study facial expressions say that while facial muscles can be trained, others may still be able to tell if smile looks practiced or faked. In other words, a smile coach might be able to help with outward expression, but real happiness must start from within. Devin Tai and Eric Tai for TaiwanPlus.
The problem of medicine shortages in Taiwan may soon get worse. The makers of 15 types of antibiotics have reportedly applied to raise the amount they can charge the national health insurance system. They say current prices do not cover their costs. About half of local drugstores have already run out of these antibiotics. Pharmacists fear the drug makers may quit the market altogether if an agreement can't be reached. The Taipei City Zoo is getting ready to increase its ticket price. The zoo plans to start charging non-Taipei residents about $3 in 2024, up from the current $2. It says the increase is necessary given the rising cost of animal feed, equipment, and maintenance. The last time it made a price adjustment was 26 years ago. The change should boost the zoo's income by about $900,000 a year. Surveys show over 90% of the public support the price hike. Taiwan's 4th Hot Air Balloon Festival took off over the weekend in northeastern Yilan County. The colorful balloons lifted visitors into the air, letting them admire the scenic beauty of Yilan's Dongsan Township. Many lined up before sunrise on the first day to catch a ride. Besides the traditional hot air balloons, one in the shape of Taipei City's mascot Bravo, a smiling Formosan black bear, was also rolled out for the first time. The 4-day event is set to wrap up next weekend. Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. Finally today, we leave you with images of people releasing sky lanterns for the Buddhist festival of Vesak at Indonesia's largest Buddhist temple. I'm Leslie Liao. Take care and see you next time.